Fast and Furious 5, released internationally under the title Fast 5, stands as one of the most important turning points in the entire Fast and Furious franchise, and it remains one of the most beloved entries among fans of the series. This film was made in the United States by Universal Pictures, produced through Original Film and One Race Films, and it was directed by Justin Lin, the filmmaker who had already shaped the tone of the franchise through his work on the previous installments. Fast 5 was written by Chris Morgan, who had become the primary architect of the series' storyline during this era, building on characters originally created by Gary Scott Thompson. The film had its world premiere in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, on April 15, 2011, a fitting choice since Rio serves as the central setting of the story, and it was then released widely in the United States on April 29, 2011. With a production budget of around $125 million, Fast 5 went on to earn more than $600 million at the worldwide box office, a result that firmly established the franchise as one of the biggest action series in Hollywood history and effectively saved it from fading away after a period of declining interest in the earlier sequels. Before diving into the plot, it is worth explaining why Fast 5 holds such a special place in cinema history. Up until this point, the Fast and Furious movies had largely been built around street racing culture, underground car meets, and small-scale heists tied to the world of illegal racing. Fast 5 completely reshaped that identity. Justin Lin and Chris Morgan made the bold decision to shift the franchise away from being purely a racing film and instead transform it into a full-blown heist and action thriller, blending the fast cars the series was known for with elaborate crew-based heist storytelling reminiscent of films like Ocean's 11, combined with hard-hitting physical action inspired by movies such as Heat. This reinvention is widely credited with turning Fast and Furious into one of the most successful and enduring franchises in modern film history, and Fast 5 is often cited by critics and audiences alike as the best film in the entire saga. The story of Fast 5 begins directly after the events of the previous film. Dominic Toretto, played by Vin Diesel, has been sentenced to prison, but before he can serve his time, his sister Mia Toretto and former undercover cop-turned-ally Brian O'Connor, played by Jordana Brewster and Paul Walker respectively, stage a daring rescue by ambushing the prison transport bus and freeing Dom in dramatic fashion. Now fugitives from the law, the trio flees across international borders, eventually finding themselves in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, hoping to disappear and start new lives far from the reach of the authorities who are hunting them. However, peace does not come easily. In Rio, the group crosses paths with Vince, a former member of Dom's original crew, who draws them into a job involving the theft of cars from a moving train. The heist is meant to be simple, but it quickly spirals out of control when they discover that one of the cars they stole contains a hidden agenda tied to a powerful and ruthless local crime lord named Hernan Reyes, played by Joaquim de Almeida. Reyes is not an ordinary criminal. He is a business tycoon who has built an empire through corruption, drug trafficking, and political manipulation, and he controls much of Rio through fear and bribery. When the job goes wrong, Reyes marks Dom, Brian, and Mia as targets, forcing them to go on the run once again, now hunted not only by his men but also by the police. Making matters even more complicated, the United States government dispatches an elite diplomatic security service agent named Luke Hobbs, portrayed by Dwayne Johnson, to track down and capture Dom and his crew. Hobbs is introduced as an intense, physically dominant, and highly skilled operative who takes his job extremely seriously, and his arrival adds a thrilling new layer of tension to the story, since he represents a nearly unstoppable force chasing our protagonists. The dynamic between Hobbs and Dom becomes one of the most memorable aspects of the film, setting the stage for the incredible on-screen chemistry between Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel that would go on to define much of the franchise's future. Realizing that Reyes is too dangerous to hide from forever, and understanding that he will not stop pursuing them, Dom decides that the only way to secure freedom and safety for himself and his family is to strike back. He comes up with an ambitious plan to steal $100 million from Reyes directly, a move that would not only fund their escape but also cripple Reyes financially and expose his criminal operations. To pull off a heist of this magnitude, Dom realizes he cannot do it alone, and this is where the film delivers one of its most exciting elements: the reassembly of characters from every previous entry in the franchise. Dom reaches out to old friends and allies from past films, bringing together a team that includes Tej Parker, played by Chris "Ludacris" Bridges, a technology and hacking expert; Roman Pierce, played by Tyrese Gibson, known for his comic energy and fearless attitude; Han Lu, played by Sung Kang, a calm and calculated wheelman; Giselle Yasher, played by Gal Gadot, a former mercenary with exceptional combat and infiltration skills; and Vince, along with several other returning faces from the franchise's history. This reunion of characters across multiple story arcs is part of what made Fast 5 feel like a true celebration of everything the series had built up until that point. As the team assembles, they begin planning an extraordinarily risky operation to break into Reyes's heavily guarded vault, which is located inside a police station due to his corrupt influence over local law enforcement. The heist itself becomes the centerpiece of the film's final act, and it is executed with remarkable creativity, blending stealth, hacking, teamwork, and raw mechanical ingenuity. Rather than transporting the money through traditional means, the crew comes up with an audacious idea. They physically rip the entire bank vault out of the police station using 2 modified Dodge Chargers, dragging it through the streets of Rio while being pursued by both Reyes's henchmen and the police. This sequence has become one of the most iconic action set pieces in the franchise's history, combining massive-scale destruction with clever engineering logic, and it remains a favorite among fans for its sheer audacity and technical execution. Throughout the chase, alliances shift and tensions rise. Hobbs, who has spent the film relentlessly pursuing Dom and his crew, eventually begins to see that Reyes is the true villain, a man whose corruption and cruelty far outweigh anything Dom and his team have done. This realization leads to a pivotal moment where Hobbs makes the decision to stand alongside Dom rather than against him, choosing to help the crew bring Reyes to justice instead of simply hunting them down for the government. This shift not only resolves the central conflict of the film but also plants the seeds for Hobbs to become a recurring and beloved character in future installments of the franchise. In the climactic confrontation, Reyes attempts to flee but is ultimately confronted and defeated, his criminal empire exposed and dismantled. With the vault secured and Reyes's downfall complete, the crew succeeds in acquiring the fortune they set out to steal. In a satisfying conclusion, Hobbs allows Dom, Brian, Mia, and their allies to escape justice, recognizing that they used their skills to take down someone far more dangerous than themselves. The film ends with the team scattering across the globe to enjoy their earnings and begin new chapters in their lives, setting up storylines that would carry forward into the subsequent films in the series. A brief additional scene near the end also hints at a major twist that would shape future entries in the franchise, adding intrigue for longtime viewers who stayed until the very end. In terms of cast, Fast 5 features an incredible ensemble that helped elevate the film beyond a typical action movie. Vin Diesel leads as Dominic Toretto, portraying a character driven by loyalty, family, and quiet determination. Paul Walker returns as Brian O'Connor, continuing his journey from law enforcement officer to devoted member of Dom's found family. Jordana Brewster plays Mia Toretto, whose bond with both Dom and Brian anchors much of the emotional core of the story. Dwayne Johnson makes his franchise debut as Luke Hobbs, instantly becoming one of the most popular characters in the series thanks to his commanding screen presence. Joaquin de Almeida delivers a memorable performance as the calculating and dangerous Hernan Reyes. The film also brings back fan favorites including Tyrese Gibson as Roman Pierce, Chris "Ludacris" Bridges as Tej Parker, Sung Kang as Han Lu, Gal Gadot as Giselle Yasher, Matt Schulze as Vince, along with Tego Calderon and Don Omar reprising their roles as Leo and Santos. This blending of characters from across the franchise's history is part of what makes Fast 5 feel like such a landmark entry, since it essentially functions as a celebration of everything that came before while simultaneously pushing the story forward into bigger and more ambitious territory. Behind the camera, the film benefited enormously from Justin Lin's direction, which balanced large-scale action with genuine character moments, ensuring that the emotional stakes never got lost amid the explosions and chases. The screenplay by Chris Morgan carefully wove together heist mechanics, personal drama, and high-octane set pieces into a cohesive and satisfying narrative. The cinematography by Stephen Windon captured the vibrant, sun-soaked energy of Rio de Janeiro, giving the film a distinct visual identity compared to earlier entries that had been set primarily in the United States. The score, composed by Brian Tyler, added intensity and emotional weight to key sequences, reinforcing both the adrenaline of the action and the deeper themes of family and loyalty that run throughout the story. Notably, Fast 5 placed a strong emphasis on practical stunt work rather than relying heavily on computer-generated effects, which gave the action sequences a tangible, grounded quality that many fans and critics praised, especially in an era when many blockbusters were leaning more heavily on digital effects. When it comes to trailer material, the promotional campaign for Fast 5 leaned heavily into showcasing the film's shift toward a heist thriller format while still delivering the high-speed car culture the franchise was known for. The trailers highlighted the prison bus rescue, teased the tension between Dom's crew and Hobbs, and built anticipation around the reunion of characters from across the series. Marketing materials emphasized the phrase associated with the crew pulling off one last job, while also showcasing the vibrant Rio de Janeiro setting as a fresh backdrop for the franchise. The build-up successfully generated massive excitement among longtime fans who were eager to see so many familiar faces share the screen together for the first time in one film. Critically, Fast 5 was met with strong praise upon release, with many reviewers highlighting it as a turning point that reinvigorated the franchise creatively and commercially. Critics praised the chemistry between Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, the inventive heist sequences, and Justin Lin's ability to juggle a massive ensemble cast without losing narrative focus. The film's blend of humor, heart, and high-stakes action struck a chord with both longtime fans and newcomers, and it is frequently cited as the moment the franchise transformed from a series about illegal street racing into a globe-spanning action saga centered on family, loyalty, and elaborate heists. Its massive box office success paved the way for even larger budgets and more ambitious storytelling in the sequels that followed, cementing Fast 5 as a foundational chapter in what would eventually become one of the highest-grossing film franchises of all time. Fast 5 stands as one of the most celebrated entries in the entire Fast and Furious saga, and its story deserves a complete, detailed walkthrough from beginning to end, because this is the film that transformed the franchise from a series about underground street racing into a globe-spanning heist and action saga. What follows is the full story of Fast 5, told scene by scene, moment by moment, so that every twist, every character decision, and every major set piece is covered in depth. The film opens in the immediate aftermath of the previous chapter in the series. Dominic Toretto has been captured by the authorities and is being processed through the justice system after years of being one of the most wanted men associated with illegal street racing and high-value theft. He has been convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and as the story begins, he is being transported by bus along with other convicted criminals toward a maximum security facility where he is expected to spend decades of his life behind bars. For a character who has always valued freedom, movement, and the open road above almost everything else, this sentence represents the ultimate cage, and the film wastes no time establishing the desperation and urgency that drives the opening sequence. Mia Toretto, Dom's sister, refuses to accept this fate for her brother. Alongside Brian O'Connor, the former undercover police officer who has become deeply intertwined with the Toretto family after falling in love with Mia and building a brotherly bond with Dom over the course of earlier events, Mia sets a bold plan into motion. The two of them, driving alongside a small convoy of cars, intercept the prison transport bus on a remote stretch of highway. What unfolds is a tightly constructed action sequence built around precision driving, timing, and nerve. Brian and Mia use their vehicles to flip the massive prison bus, sending it tumbling and skidding across the road in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The bus comes to rest on its side, damaged but not destroyed, and in the chaos that follows, Dom manages to break free from his restraints and escape through the wreckage. The rescue is successful, but it comes at a price. All three of them are now officially fugitives, wanted not just for past crimes but for this dramatic and highly public escape. There can be no going back to their old lives in the United States. Their only option is to run, and to keep running until they find somewhere far enough away that the reach of American law enforcement can no longer easily touch them. The opening rescue sequence deserves particular attention because of how carefully it is constructed to re-establish the emotional stakes of the franchise before the story moves into entirely new territory. The prison bus itself is shown rumbling along an isolated highway, flanked by armed guards, carrying Dom alongside other convicted men who have no idea that an elaborate rescue is about to unfold around them. Brian and Mia approach from a distance, their vehicles trailing at a careful pace so as not to draw suspicion, before suddenly accelerating and boxing the bus in from multiple angles. The sequence uses a combination of precision driving and brute force, with the smaller, more agile cars used by Brian and Mia working together to destabilize the much larger and heavier prison vehicle. When the bus finally tips and rolls, the sequence lingers just long enough on the wreckage to make clear how dangerous the maneuver truly was, both for the guards inside and for Dom himself, who must fight his way free from the overturned vehicle before either the authorities recover or Reyes's world even becomes a factor. This opening also does important character work, reminding the audience of the fierce loyalty that defines the relationship between Dom, Mia, and Brian, a loyalty that will be tested again and again throughout the rest of the story as the stakes continue to escalate. Their escape takes them across international borders, and they eventually make their way to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, a city defined by its sprawling favelas, its vibrant street culture, and its complicated relationship between wealth, poverty, and corruption. Rio is chosen deliberately as a place where three fugitives might disappear into the crowd, blend into a foreign culture, and begin to rebuild something resembling a normal life, even if that life will always be lived looking over their shoulders. For a brief moment, the film allows Dom, Brian, and Mia to breathe, to imagine a future where they are simply people trying to survive quietly rather than hunted criminals with prices on their heads. That fragile peace does not last long. Dom is soon approached by a familiar face from his past, a former member of his original street racing crew named Vince, who was once one of Dom's closest friends before a falling out years earlier. Vince has been living in Rio and has become entangled in local criminal circles, and he sees Dom's arrival as an opportunity. He proposes a job. A group of cars are being transported aboard a moving train, and Vince wants Dom's help stealing them. On the surface, this sounds like exactly the kind of operation Dom has built his reputation on, a straightforward theft involving high-performance vehicles, precision driving, and a tight window of opportunity. Despite his instincts warning him that trusting Vince again could be a mistake, Dom recognizes that he, Brian, and Mia need money and resources to survive in Rio, and he agrees to take part in the job, bringing Brian along as additional muscle and expertise. The train heist itself is staged as one of the film's earliest major action sequences, and it sets the tone for the kind of large-scale, high-stakes spectacle the rest of the movie will deliver. Dom, Brian, Vince, and their small team intercept the moving train, using vehicles to match its speed alongside the tracks before boarding it, and working to extract the cars being transported inside specialized train cars. The operation requires split-second coordination, physical strength, and nerve, as the crew works against the clock while the train continues barreling forward. What should be a relatively simple smash and grab operation quickly becomes far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. The mechanics of the heist are shown in careful detail, illustrating just how much planning and physical risk is involved in stealing vehicles from a moving train. The crew must match the train's speed exactly, drive alongside the tracks on a parallel dirt road, and then transfer personnel and equipment onto the moving cars using ramps and improvised bridges between vehicles and train cars. Once aboard, they work quickly to disconnect the couplings holding the vehicle-carrying cars in place, gradually detaching sections of the train so that the cars they want can be driven directly off the tracks and onto the ground below without derailing the entire train or injuring anyone aboard. Brian, drawing on his precise driving skills, takes personal responsibility for guiding some of the most difficult vehicle transfers, while Dom oversees the overall operation, watching for signs of trouble both from the train crew and from the surrounding landscape. The sequence carries a sense of mounting unease even before anything goes wrong, since the audience can sense that a job this large and this public is unlikely to go as smoothly as everyone hopes. As the crew begins to unload the vehicles from the train, they discover that hidden among the cars is something Vince never mentioned, something that was not part of the original plan. It becomes clear that this heist was never simply about stealing luxury automobiles. Vince has kept crucial information from Dom, and it turns out that one of the vehicles secretly contains classified information and hidden assets connected to Hernan Reyes, a powerful and dangerous businessman who controls much of the criminal underworld in Rio de Janeiro through a combination of legitimate-looking business fronts, deep political corruption, and outright violence. Reyes is not the kind of man who tolerates being stolen from, and the crew's actions on that train have just made them targets of one of the most dangerous men in South America, whether they fully understand the implications yet or not. Complicating matters further, the heist attracts the attention of local law enforcement, and in the chaos of the operation, gunfire breaks out. Vince, in a moment of panic and self-preservation, shoots and kills a police officer, an act that Dom absolutely did not sanction and would never have condoned. This moment becomes a critical turning point, both for the plot and for Dom's characterization. Even as a fugitive, even as a man who has broken numerous laws throughout his life, Dom operates according to a personal code that draws a hard line against senseless violence, particularly against law enforcement who are simply doing their jobs. Vince's actions represent a betrayal of that code, and the fallout from this moment will echo through the rest of the story, ultimately leading Dom to cut ties with Vince entirely once the full consequences of his recklessness become clear. In the immediate aftermath, Dom is forced to leave Vince behind, injured, as he, Brian, and the surviving crew members make their escape from the wreckage of the train heist, now carrying not just stolen cars but the weight of having drawn the attention of Hernan Reyes and having a murdered police officer attributed to their operation. With their situation now dramatically more dangerous than before, Dom and Brian realize that hiding quietly in Rio is no longer a viable long-term strategy. Reyes will not simply let the theft go unanswered, and the local police, now investigating a cop killing tied to their heist, will be relentless in trying to track down everyone involved. It is at this point that the film introduces one of its most important and enduring new characters. The United States government, having learned that Dominic Toretto and Brian O'Connor are alive and operating in Brazil, dispatches an elite diplomatic security service agent to lead the manhunt and bring them to justice. That agent is Luke Hobbs, a towering, relentless, and supremely capable operative who approaches his job with the intensity of a man who has never failed to close a case. Hobbs arrives in Rio with a hand-picked team of skilled operatives, and from his very first scene, the film establishes him as a genuine threat, someone whose physical presence and tactical brilliance make him more than a match for Dom and Brian even when they are working together. Hobbs makes it clear to his team and to the audience that he intends to capture his targets quickly, efficiently, and without excuses. Hobbs's introduction is deliberately staged to contrast sharply with the world Dom and Brian inhabit. where Dom's crew operates through loyalty, improvisation, and family bonds forged over years of shared history, Hobbs represents institutional power, discipline, and overwhelming resources. His team moves with military precision, arriving in Rio equipped with surveillance technology, armored vehicles, and a clear chain of command that Dom's more freewheeling crew simply does not have access to. This contrast is important because it raises the stakes considerably. For the first time in the franchise, Dom and Brian are not facing rival racers, small-time criminals, or even a single determined detective, but an entire branch of the federal government backed by seemingly unlimited manpower. Hobbs studies case files on Dom and Brian with the same intensity a hunter might study the tracks of a dangerous animal, briefing his team on their target's known associates, driving habits, and psychological profiles, making it clear from the outset that he does not intend to underestimate the men he has been sent to capture. Hobbs begins his hunt by tracking down leads connected to the train heist and to Vince, who is recovering from his injuries and desperate to avoid both Reyes's men and the police. In a tense sequence, Hobbs and his team locate Vince and interrogate him, extracting information about Dom, Brian, and Mia's whereabouts and general activities in Rio. This puts Hobbs on a much faster track toward finding his targets than Dom would like, and it sets up a cat-and-mouse dynamic that will define much of the middle portion of the film. Meanwhile, Reyes, having learned that his stolen property was taken by a small crew of foreign fugitives, dispatches his own men to hunt down Dom and Brian as well, meaning that our protagonists now find themselves squeezed from multiple directions at once, pursued by an elite federal agent determined to bring them back to face justice, and simultaneously hunted by a ruthless crime lord's private army who want them dead for what they took and what they now know. Dom quickly comes to a sobering realization. Simply running will not solve this problem. Reyes is far too powerful, with too many resources, too many corrupt officials in his pocket, and too much determination to let this go. Even if Dom, Brian, and Mia manage to escape Rio entirely, Reyes's reach and resentment could follow them anywhere, and Hobbs, now actively hunting them with the full backing of the United States government, is not going to simply give up either. Dom concludes that the only way to truly secure freedom, safety, and a future for himself and his family is to go on the offensive rather than remain purely reactive. He begins to formulate an audacious plan to steal $100 million in cash directly from Hernan Reyes himself. This is not merely about the money, although the money would certainly help fund their new lives as fugitives. It is about striking a blow so devastating to Reyes's operation that it would cripple him financially and expose the full extent of his criminal empire, effectively removing him as a threat altogether. It is an enormous, almost impossible goal, but Dom recognizes that boldness may be their only real path to safety. Dom understands immediately that pulling off a heist of this scale is far beyond what he, Brian, and Mia can accomplish alone. They need specialists, people with very specific skill sets, people they can trust completely because the stakes could not be higher. This realization sets in motion one of the most beloved sequences in the entire film, as Dom begins reaching out to old allies and friends scattered around the world, calling in favors and gathering together a team unlike anything the franchise had assembled before. The first calls go out to Tej Parker, a brilliant technology expert and former street racer with deep knowledge of hacking, surveillance systems, and vehicle modification, who has been running his own operation involving custom cars and mechanical engineering. Tej agrees to join without hesitation, bringing both his technical expertise and his easygoing, often comedic energy to the group dynamic. Alongside Tej comes Roman Pierce, an old friend of Brian's from his earlier undercover days, a fast-talking, fearless, and endlessly charismatic figure whose bravado often masks genuine skill and courage when it matters most. Roman's arrival injects much-needed humor and personality into the increasingly tense situation the crew finds itself in, and his dynamic with Tej, full of friendly rivalry and comedic banter, becomes a fan-favorite element of the film. Next, Dom reaches out to Han Lu, a calm, quietly skilled wheelman with a long history alongside Dom's crew, known for his composure under pressure and his precise driving abilities. Han's steady presence provides a grounding counterbalance to some of the louder personalities on the team, and his loyalty to Dom runs deep, forged through prior shared experiences and mutual respect. Alongside Han comes Giselle Yasher, a former operative with a background in high-level espionage and combat, originally introduced as someone connected to dangerous underworld dealings but who has since aligned herself with Dom's crew. Giselle brings infiltration skills, weapons expertise, and a level of tactical sophistication that proves invaluable as the team begins planning their assault on Reyes's operation. Her growing closeness with Han throughout the film adds an emotional thread that runs alongside the larger heist plot, giving their characters added weight and investment for the audience. Rounding out the assembled crew are Leo and Santos, two brothers with backgrounds in explosives and demolition, whose specific expertise will prove critical when the team's plan eventually requires controlled destruction on a massive scale. Even Vince, despite the tension surrounding his earlier reckless actions and the death he caused, ends up remaining tangentially connected to the group's orbit, a reminder of the complicated history and loyalty that binds this found family together even when trust has been damaged. Watching this team come together across a series of quick introductions is one of the most purely enjoyable stretches of the film, since it allows each character to reintroduce themselves with a moment that captures their personality before the larger plot demands their full attention. Tej is shown running his own operation with a mixture of technical brilliance and laid-back showmanship, clearly delighted at the prospect of being pulled into something bigger than his usual work. Roman arrives with his trademark bravado fully intact, immediately sparring verbally with Tej in a rivalry that has clearly existed for years and that will provide a steady stream of comic relief throughout the more tense stretches of the film. Han's introduction is quieter and more understated, reflecting his generally composed personality, while Giselle's arrival carries an air of quiet danger and competence that immediately signals she is not someone to be underestimated despite her calm demeanor. Once the full team is gathered in one place, Dom lays out the situation honestly. The job he is asking them to help with is enormous, extraordinarily dangerous, and offers no guarantee of success. But if they pull it off, it will finally grant all of them the kind of freedom and security that has always eluded people living life the way they do. The response from the assembled group is immediate and unanimous, each member choosing to stay and commit fully to the plan despite the obvious risks, reinforcing the found family theme that has always defined the emotional backbone of the franchise. With the team assembled, the middle portion of the film shifts into planning mode, but planning in the Fast and Furious universe rarely stays quiet or safe for long. The crew needs detailed information about Reyes's operation, including the layout of his properties, the movement patterns of his money, and the security measures protecting his wealth. This leads to a series of reconnaissance missions and smaller confrontations that keep the tension escalating even as the team works toward their larger goal. One of the most memorable sequences in this stretch of the film involves the crew's attempt to identify exactly where Reyes keeps his money and how it moves through the city. They discover that Reyes operates through a network of corrupt police stations, using law enforcement infrastructure itself as a shield for his criminal wealth, since few would dare raid a police station looking for stolen cash. This revelation becomes central to the eventual heist plan, but acquiring this information is not without serious risk. During their investigation, the crew's activities draw Hobbs closer to their location, and a tense confrontation nearly results in Dom's capture. In a pivotal and much-discussed sequence, Hobbs and his team corner Dom in a favela, leading to an intense hand-to-hand confrontation between Hobbs and Dom that showcases both men's physical power and stubborn refusal to back down. Dom narrowly escapes, but the encounter leaves a lasting impression on both characters, hinting that Hobbs is beginning to see something in Dom beyond a simple criminal to be captured. This favela confrontation is staged with a raw, grounded physicality that stands apart from much of the vehicle-based action found elsewhere in the film. The narrow alleyways and stacked, colorful buildings of the favela create a claustrophobic arena where cars are largely useless, forcing Dom to rely purely on speed, instinct, and physical strength to avoid capture. Hobbs, moving with the same relentless focus he has shown throughout his introduction, manages to corner Dom in a tight space, and the two men trade a brutal series of blows before Dom manages to break away, disappearing into the maze-like streets before Hobbs can secure him. Rather than feeling frustrated by the failure, Hobbs seems almost intrigued, recognizing in Dom a level of physical toughness and resourcefulness he rarely encounters in the criminals he is normally sent to capture. This grudging respect, though not yet acknowledged outright by either character, plants the earliest seeds of the alliance that will eventually form between them. The reconnaissance phase of the film also introduces the audience to the sheer scale of Reyes's operation through a series of scenes depicting his business fronts, his political connections, and the fear his name instills throughout the city. Reyes is shown moving through legitimate-looking offices and social functions with the easy confidence of a man who believes himself untouchable, surrounded by lawyers, business partners, and law enforcement officials who owe their positions and their silence to his money. These scenes are important because they establish Reyes not as a cartoonish villain, but as a chillingly plausible portrait of institutional corruption, a man whose greatest weapon is not violence itself but the vast network of complicity he has built around himself over many years. Understanding the depth of this corruption is what eventually convinces both Dom's crew and Hobbs that conventional methods, whether criminal or lawful, will never be enough to bring Reyes down. Only something as audacious as stealing his entire fortune out from under him has any realistic chance of dismantling the empire he has built. As the crew continues gathering intelligence, they also come to understand the true scale of Reyes's corruption. He is not merely a wealthy criminal. He has effectively purchased the loyalty of significant portions of Rio's police force and political establishment, using bribery, intimidation, and violence to maintain his grip on power. This context becomes important to the film's moral framework, positioning Dom's crew not simply as thieves seeking a payday, but as a group taking dramatic and illegal action against a man whose corruption has caused genuine harm to the city and its people. This distinction matters greatly for how other characters, particularly Hobbs, come to view the situation as the story progresses. Tensions come to a head when Reyes, having identified members of Dom's crew, orders an assault intended to eliminate them once and for all. This results in a dramatic chase and confrontation sequence in which the crew must fight for survival against Reyes's armed men while simultaneously trying to avoid capture by Hobbs's team, who are still actively hunting them through the city. During this sequence, Elena Neves, a local police detective who has been secretly working to gather evidence against Reyes's corruption for her own reasons, becomes an unexpected ally to Dom and his crew. Elena's personal history, including a lost husband whose death was connected to Reyes's criminal dealings, gives her powerful motivation to see Reyes brought down, and she begins quietly assisting Dom and the team, providing information and cover that proves crucial as the story moves toward its climax. Her presence also adds emotional complexity, since her position as a police officer creates ongoing tension with her willingness to work alongside wanted fugitives against a common enemy. Elena's backstory is revealed gradually throughout the middle portion of the film, painting a picture of a woman who once believed in the justice system she serves before watching it fail her in the most personal way imaginable. Her husband, also a police officer, was killed as a direct consequence of Reyes's corrupting influence over the force, and in the years since, Elena has quietly continued working within the department, while privately gathering whatever evidence she can find against Reyes, waiting for an opportunity to see him held accountable through legitimate means. When Dom's crew arrives and begins actively working against Reyes, Elena recognizes an opportunity she has been waiting years for, even if the methods being used fall far outside the boundaries of the law she has sworn to uphold. Her decision to assist Dom's crew is never portrayed as an easy or uncomplicated one. The film allows her genuine hesitation and moral conflict to come through, particularly in her early interactions with Dom, where mutual suspicion gradually gives way to cautious trust as both parties come to understand they are working toward the same fundamental goal. Elena's assistance proves invaluable in later stages of the plan, since her position within the police department gives the crew access to information and cover that would otherwise be impossible to obtain. Hobbs, meanwhile, is forced to reconsider his assumptions as he gathers more information about the situation unfolding around him. He begins to recognize that Reyes represents a far greater and more dangerous threat than Dom and his crew ever have, and that Reyes's corruption runs deep enough to have compromised significant portions of local law enforcement and government. This dawning realization does not happen instantly. It develops gradually through a series of encounters and discoveries, including moments where Hobbs witnesses firsthand the brutality and reach of Reyes's operation. The film uses this slow shift in Hobbs's perspective to build toward one of its most satisfying character arcs, as a man defined by unwavering commitment to bringing in his targets begins to question whether capturing Dom and Brian is really the right thing to do when a far greater injustice is being allowed to continue unchecked. With Reyes now actively trying to eliminate them and Hobbs closing in from another direction, Dom recognizes that time is running out. The team accelerates their planning, finalizing the details of the audacious heist that will define the film's climax. Their target is the entirety of Reyes's cash reserves, an enormous sum kept secured within a heavily reinforced vault located inside a police station, chosen specifically by Reyes because he correctly assumed no one would dare attempt to rob a building filled with armed officers, many of whom are on his payroll and would defend the vault as though it were their own. The plan the crew devises is audacious even by the standards of this franchise. Rather than attempting to crack the vault open on sight, an approach that would take far too long and expose them to overwhelming resistance, they decide on something far more radical, physically ripping the entire vault out of the building and dragging it through the streets of Rio using modified vehicles, planning to open it later once they have escaped the immediate danger zone. This requires careful engineering, precise timing, and nerves of steel, since the plan involves navigating heavy, unwieldy cargo through the chaos of a major city while being pursued by armed enemies and law enforcement alike. Preparation for the heist involves the entire team working in concert, each contributing their specific expertise. Tej modifies vehicles and communication systems to give the crew a technological edge. Leo and Santos prepare explosive charges designed to breach walls and create diversions at precisely timed moments. Giselle and Han work through infiltration logistics, mapping out points of entry and escape routes through the police station and surrounding streets. Roman provides both comic relief and genuine tactical input, while Brian and Mia handle coordination and oversight, ensuring that every moving piece aligns with the larger plan. Dom, as the architect of the entire operation, holds the team together through sheer force of will and leadership, reminding everyone throughout the process that this is not simply about the money, but about securing a future where they are no longer hunted, no longer forced to run, and finally free to live without constant fear. The planning sequences also include a series of test runs and rehearsals, as the crew works through the mechanics of detaching a bank vault of this size and weight without causing a catastrophic failure that could kill everyone involved or destroy the very cash they are trying to steal. Tej and the others calculate the load-bearing capacity of the modified chargers, reinforcing their frames and drivetrains to handle the unprecedented strain of dragging tens of thousands of pounds of reinforced steel through city streets. Leo and Santos handle the explosive charges needed to breach the vault rooms surrounding walls quickly and cleanly, while also preparing smaller diversionary charges designed to draw attention away from the actual point of entry during the critical opening moments of the heist. Brian and Dom walk through the planned escape route repeatedly, memorizing turns, identifying potential choke points where pursuit vehicles might attempt to box them in, and establishing fallback routes in case their primary path becomes blocked. Every member of the crew understands that a single miscalculation, whether in timing, engineering, or coordination, could unravel the entire plan and potentially cost them their lives, and this shared understanding of the stakes creates a palpable tension that runs through every planning scene, even amid the team's characteristic humor and camaraderie. The night of the heist arrives, and the film builds toward its extended climactic sequence with mounting tension. The crew infiltrates the police station under cover of a diversion, using their combined skills to bypass security measures and reach the vault room without triggering a full-scale alarm. Once inside, rather than attempting to crack the vault's combination or drill through its reinforced walls, the team executes their plan to physically detach the entire vault from its foundation, rigging it with heavy-duty chains connected to two specially modified Dodge Charger muscle cars positioned outside the building. As soon as the vault is ripped free from the structure, chaos erupts. The controlled destruction alerts every corrupt officer and security guard in the vicinity, and Reyes's own men, who have been tracking the situation closely, converge on the location almost immediately. What follows is one of the most iconic and widely celebrated action sequences not just in this film, but in the history of the franchise. Dom and Brian, each driving one of the modified Chargers, tear through the streets of Rio de Janeiro with a massive vault dragging behind them on chains, using its sheer weight and momentum as both an escape mechanism and, when necessary, an improvised weapon against pursuing vehicles. The vault crashes through obstacles, flips pursuing cars, and demolishes everything in its path as Dom and Brian navigate through narrow streets, busy intersections, and increasingly desperate law enforcement roadblocks, all while the rest of the crew works to provide cover, clear paths, and manage the unfolding chaos from other positions around the city. The chase sequence escalates dramatically as more of Reyes's men join the pursuit, joined eventually by significant elements of the local police force, creating an overwhelming gauntlet of pursuers that seems nearly impossible for Dom and Brian to survive. Throughout the chase, the vault itself becomes almost a character in its own right, its immense weight and unstoppable momentum turning the streets of Rio into a demolition derby as it swings behind the two Chargers, taking out pursuing vehicles with brutal, almost comedic efficiency. The sequence combines large-scale destruction with genuine tension, since the audience remains uncertain whether the crew will actually manage to escape given the sheer number of forces arrayed against them. At the height of the chase, Hobbs, who has been tracking the unfolding chaos from his own position, is forced to make the defining decision of his character arc, faced with the choice of continuing his pursuit of Dom and Brian to bring them to justice as ordered, or recognizing the greater injustice represented by Reyes's criminal empire and corrupt influence over the city. Hobbs ultimately chooses to stand aside, and eventually to actively assist Dom's crew rather than continue hunting them. This decision does not come easily or without internal conflict, and the film takes care to show Hobbs wrestling with his professional obligations against his growing understanding of the moral complexity of the situation before him. His eventual choice to help rather than hinder represents one of the most significant turning points in the film, transforming him from antagonist to ally and setting up his continued presence in the franchise for years to come. The vault chase sequence itself unfolds across an extended stretch of the film's third act, and its scale grows progressively larger as it continues. What begins as Dom and Brian simply trying to navigate the immediate streets surrounding the police station soon expands into a citywide pursuit, with Reyes's men, corrupt police officers, and eventually legitimate law enforcement units all converging on the chase from different directions. The two Chargers, straining under the weight of the vault chain between them, plow through market stalls, crash through storefronts, and carve destructive paths through neighborhoods as Dom and Brian work in coordinated tandem, using hand signals and radio communication to time their turns so the vault swings wide enough to clear obstacles without snapping the chains or losing control entirely. At several points, the vault itself becomes an active weapon, swinging out to the side at critical moments to slam into pursuing vehicles, sending police cars and gang vehicles alike spinning off the road in dramatic, almost balletic destruction. The rest of the crew supports the escape from other positions throughout the city, with Tej monitoring communications and traffic patterns, Roman running interference on side streets, and Giselle and Han working to redirect pursuing forces away from Dom and Brian's primary route. Mia, meanwhile, coordinates from a secondary vehicle, tracking the overall situation and providing critical updates as the chase evolves in real time. With Hobbs no longer actively working against them, and with Elena Nevis providing crucial assistance from within the police apparatus to help clear paths and manage the chaos, Dom and Brian manage to finally break free from the bulk of their pursuers, dragging the vault to a secured location where the rest of the crew can help secure it and begin planning their next move. However, the confrontation with Reyes himself is not yet fully resolved. Reyes, desperate and enraged at having his fortune stolen and his operation exposed, makes a final attempt to eliminate Dom and reclaim what was taken from him, leading to a tense final confrontation where Reyes's remaining power and influence are decisively broken. Facing the combined efforts of Dom's crew, the assistance of Hobbs, and the mounting evidence of his corruption now impossible to hide, Reyes's criminal empire collapses entirely. His downfall is thorough and complete, stripping him of the wealth, power, and protection that had made him such a formidable threat throughout the film, and ensuring that he will finally face consequences for the corruption and violence he has spread throughout Rio de Janeiro for years. The final confrontation with Reyes is staged with a deliberate sense of reversal, showing the once untouchable crime lord stripped of his usual protections and forced to face the very people he tried to have eliminated. Having lost his fortune, his corrupt allies scrambling to distance themselves from him now that his operation has been exposed, and his personal security overwhelmed by the chaos unfolding across the city, Reyes finds himself vulnerable in a way he has clearly not experienced in a very long time. His attempt to personally confront Dom and reclaim what has been taken from him ends in decisive failure, and the sequence underscores just how completely his position of power has crumbled over the course of a single night. Elena, who has waited years for this exact moment, plays a meaningful role in ensuring that Reyes finally faces consequences that extend beyond the immediate confrontation, using the evidence she has gathered to ensure his corruption cannot simply be buried or ignored the way it might have been in the past. In the aftermath of Reyes's defeat, the vault is finally opened, revealing the full $100 million the crew set out to steal. True to the found family themes that run throughout the franchise, the money is divided among the team, providing each member with the resources needed to start new lives far from the reach of their previous troubles. Hobbs, having chosen to let Dom, Brian, and the rest of the crew go free rather than bring them in, reports back to his superiors with a version of events that allows the team to escape justice, recognizing that their actions, however illegal, served a greater good by dismantling a criminal empire that had corrupted an entire city. This decision cements Hobbs's transformation from relentless pursuer to trusted ally, a relationship that would go on to become one of the most significant and beloved dynamics in the franchise's future installments. The film's closing sequences show the team scattering across the globe, each member heading toward their own version of a fresh start funded by their share of the stolen fortune. Dom and Brian, along with Mia, finally find a measure of the peace and freedom they had been chasing since the film's opening prison rescue, no longer forced to constantly look over their shoulders, though the nature of their world means that true stability may always remain somewhat elusive given the lives they have chosen to lead. Individual character moments give closure to several of the film's relationships, including the continued bond between Han and Giselle, whose connection deepens throughout the events of the story, and the ongoing camaraderie between Roman and Tej, whose friendly rivalry provides one final comedic beat as the team parts ways. Before the credits roll, the film includes a brief but significant additional scene that hints at major developments still to come in the franchise, planting a seed that would blossom into one of the most consequential storylines of later installments. This closing tease rewards longtime fans who have followed the series closely, offering a glimpse of danger and complexity still waiting on the horizon even as the immediate story of Fast 5 reaches its triumphant conclusion. The final scenes also take time to show quieter, more personal moments between the characters, allowing the emotional weight of everything they have been through to settle before the film ends. Dom and Brian share a reflective exchange that reinforces the brotherhood that has defined their relationship since it first began, acknowledging both how far they have come and the uncertain road that still lies ahead of them, even with their newfound resources and freedom. Mia, who has spent much of the film supporting the operation from behind the scenes, is given a moment to look toward the future with something resembling hope, a rare feeling for a woman who has spent years living under the constant shadow of her brother's outlaw lifestyle. Elena, having finally seen Reyes's corruption exposed and dismantled after years of quiet struggle, is left with a measure of closure that her character has been denied for a long time, even as the film leaves open questions about what her future role might look like given her unconventional alliance with fugitives during the course of the story. These smaller character beats matter because they ground the film's larger-than-life action within genuine emotional stakes, ensuring that the explosive climax feels earned rather than hollow. It is also worth pausing to consider how the character of Hobbs continues to evolve even in these final moments. His decision to let the crew go free is not treated as a simple, easy resolution, but rather as the culmination of a genuine internal struggle that has been building since his very first scene. Hobbs built his entire professional identity around unwavering commitment to his mission, and choosing to set that aside, even for what he now recognizes as the right reasons, represents a meaningful sacrifice of the certainty that has always defined him. The film handles this transition carefully, allowing Hobbs a moment of quiet reflection as he processes the choice he has made, one that will fundamentally alter the trajectory of his career and, as future films would go on to show, the trajectory of his life entirely. This character-defining decision is part of why Hobbs would go on to become such an essential and enduring figure within the franchise, since his introduction in Fast 5 gave audiences a fully realized character capable of genuine growth rather than a one-dimensional obstacle for the heroes to overcome. Looking back at the film's structure as a whole, it becomes clear just how carefully Fast 5 balances its many moving pieces. The story juggles multiple factions, including Dom's crew, Reyes's criminal organization, Hobbs's federal team, and Elena's quiet resistance from within the police force, all while maintaining a clear narrative through line that never becomes confusing or overstuffed despite the sheer number of characters and competing interests involved. Each faction has clearly defined goals that create natural conflict and tension, and the film does an impressive job of gradually aligning these competing interests toward a shared climax without ever feeling forced or contrived. The gradual shift of Hobbs from pursuer to ally, the deepening involvement of Elena as an insider willing to work outside official channels, and the steady escalation of Reyes's threat all combine to create a final act that feels both surprising and inevitable at the same time, a difficult balance that few action films manage to strike as effectively as Fast 5 does. The film's pacing also deserves recognition, since it manages to deliver an almost constant stream of tension and action, while still leaving room for character development, humor, and quieter emotional beats throughout its runtime. The opening prison rescue immediately signals the scale of ambition the film intends to pursue. The train heist and its violent aftermath raise the stakes considerably. The introduction of Hobbs adds a formidable new obstacle. The assembly of the crew provides a burst of energy and nostalgia for longtime fans. The reconnaissance and planning sequences build anticipation for the climactic heist. And the vault chase itself delivers on every promise the film has been building toward across its runtime. This structure ensures that audiences remain engaged from beginning to end, with each act building meaningfully on what came before rather than simply stringing together disconnected action sequences for the sake of spectacle. Taken as a whole, the story of Fast 5 represents a masterclass in ensemble storytelling within the action genre. It successfully weaves together personal stakes, found family dynamics, large-scale heist mechanics, and relentless action set pieces into a cohesive narrative that never loses sight of its emotional core even as the scale of its spectacle grows increasingly massive. The decision to bring together characters from across the franchise's history into a single unified crew gave the film a sense of celebration and culmination that resonated deeply with longtime fans, while the introduction of Luke Hobbs and the film's shift toward heist-based storytelling opened up entirely new creative possibilities that would shape the direction of the franchise for years afterward. The vault chase through the streets of Rio remains one of the most iconic sequences in modern action cinema, a perfect encapsulation of the film's willingness to embrace bold, larger-than-life ideas while still grounding them in practical stunt work and genuine tension. Reyes's downfall serves as a satisfying conclusion to the film's central conflict, while Hobbs's transformation from antagonist to ally provides one of the most compelling character arcs in the entire series. Ultimately, Fast 5 tells the story of a found family pushed to their absolute limits, forced to choose between running forever or standing together to fight for a future where they no longer have to run at all, and their choice to fight, to trust one another, and to pull off the impossible, is what makes this film such an enduring and beloved chapter in the Fast and Furious saga. It is also worth reflecting on how the film's central themes of family, loyalty, and redemption resonate so strongly with audiences precisely because they are woven so tightly into the mechanics of the plot itself. Every major decision in the story, from Mia and Brian's decision to risk everything for Dom's freedom, to Dom's insistence on gathering trusted allies rather than attempting the heist alone, to Hobbs's ultimate choice to stand with the crew rather than against them, is driven by relationships built on trust earned over time rather than convenience or self-interest. This emotional through-line is part of why Fast 5 continues to be remembered so fondly even years after its release, since the spectacle of the vault chase and the audacity of the heist would mean far less without the genuine human connections underpinning every choice the characters make throughout the story. The film understands that its audience cares about these characters as a family first and thrill-seeking outlaw second, and that understanding is reflected in nearly every scene, whether it is a quiet moment of reassurance between siblings, a hard-won moment of respect between former adversaries, or the collective determination of a found family refusing to let any one of their own be left behind. This is the story of Fast 5 in full, a tale of desperation turned into opportunity, of enemies turned into allies, and of a family that chose to stop running and start fighting for the freedom they had been chasing since the very first frame of the film. Every great film is only as strong as the people who bring its characters to life, and Fast 5 assembled one of the most fascinating casts in modern action cinema, a group of performers whose real-life journeys to stardom are often just as compelling as the story they told on screen. Understanding who these actors are, where they came from, and how they built their careers adds an entirely new layer of appreciation for what Fast 5 accomplished. So let us take a deep and detailed look at the life stories of the actors who made this film such an unforgettable experience. We begin with the man at the very center of the entire franchise, Vin Diesel, who portrays Dominic Toretto. Vin Diesel was born Mark Sinclair on July 18, 1967, in Alameda County, California, though he spent most of his childhood in New York City's Greenwich Village. His mother worked as a psychologist and astrologer, and he was raised by his adoptive African-American stepfather, a theater manager who introduced him to the stage at a very young age, while his biological father remained unknown to him for much of his life. He has a fraternal twin brother named Paul, who would later become a film editor, as well as a younger brother and a sister. One of the most remarkable stories from his childhood involves how his acting career actually began entirely by accident. At around 7 years old, Diesel and a group of friends broke into a Greenwich Village venue called the Theater for the New City, intending simply to cause mischief. But instead of being punished harshly, a woman working there offered each of the children a script and a small amount of money on the condition that they return every day after school to rehearse. That unexpected encounter planted the earliest seeds of what would become a lifelong passion for performance, and Diesel continued acting through a New York repertory company associated with his father and later through the city's off-Broadway theater circuit. As a teenager, Diesel needed additional income, and given his already imposing physical build, took work as a bouncer at some of New York's most well-known nightclubs, including a venue called Tunnel, a job he would continue for roughly 9 years. It was during this period that he adopted the name Vin Diesel, shortening his given name Vincent to Vin and taking on the nickname Diesel, which friends had given him because of his seemingly endless energy. He went on to study English and creative writing at Hunter College, but ultimately dropped out after 3 years to pursue acting more seriously, moving to Hollywood in hopes that his theater background would open doors. That initial attempt at breaking into the industry proved disappointing, and after failing to gain any real traction, he returned to New York disheartened. It was his mother who gave him the encouragement and practical guidance he needed at this low point, providing him with a book about independent filmmaking that inspired him to take control of his own career rather than waiting for others to give him a chance. Diesel funded his first feature film by working as a telemarketer, and he went on to write, direct, and star in a short film called Multifacial, a deeply personal project exploring the struggles of a mixed-race actor trying to find work in an industry that often did not know how to categorize him. That short film screened at the Cannes Film Festival in 1995 and caught the attention of director Steven Spielberg, who was so impressed that he cast Diesel in a supporting role in Saving Private Ryan in 1998, a film that became Diesel's true breakout moment and opened the door to a career in major studio productions. From there, Diesel took on a wide range of roles, including a memorable voice performance in The Iron Giant, a corrupt stockbroker in Boiler Room, and a menacing survivor in the science fiction thriller Pitch Black, before landing the role that would come to define his career, Dominic Toretto in The Fast and the Furious in 2001. A part that eventually made him one of the most recognizable action stars in the world and through Fast 5, helped reshape the entire trajectory of the franchise. Standing alongside Diesel throughout much of the franchise was Paul Walker, who played Brian O'Connor, and whose own life story carries both remarkable achievement and profound tragedy. Paul William Walker IV was born on September 12, 1973, in Glendale, California, to a father who worked as a sewer contractor and a mother who had previously worked as a model. His family background was notably colorful. One of his grandfathers survived the attack on Pearl Harbor and had been a champion boxer in the United States Navy, while another grandfather commanded a tank unit under General George Patton during the Second World War. Walker grew up in a conservative household alongside 2 younger brothers and a sister, and from a very young age he began working as a child model and actor, appearing in television commercials and small television roles throughout the 1980s, including appearances on shows like Highway to Heaven and Who's the Boss. His first film role came in the campy horror comedy Monster in the Closet when he was still just a child. Despite his early entry into show business, Walker harbored a genuine passion for marine biology throughout his youth, a fascination with the ocean that would remain with him for the rest of his life and that he pursued academically at several colleges even as his acting career began to take shape. Walker's teenage years saw him build a reputation as a rising star through coming-of-age films such as She's All That and Varsity Blues, both of which helped establish him as a recognizable face among younger audiences heading into the new millennium. His true breakout, however, came when he was cast as Brian O'Connor in The Fast and the Furious in 2001, a role centered on an undercover police officer infiltrating the world of illegal street racing, and the film's massive success turned Walker into one of the most bankable young action stars of his generation. He would go on to appear in a wide variety of films, including the war drama Flags of Our Fathers directed by Clint Eastwood, demonstrating a range beyond action cinema, while continuing to anchor the Fast and Furious franchise through multiple sequels, including his central role in Fast 5 as Brian, now fully embedded within the found family dynamic that had come to define the series. Beyond acting, Walker was deeply committed to humanitarian work, founding an organization called Reach Out Worldwide in 2010, a nonprofit dedicated to providing rapid disaster relief to communities affected by natural catastrophes around the world, reflecting a side of his personality that many fans found just as compelling as his on-screen charisma. Tragically, Paul Walker's life was cut short on November 30, 2013, when he was killed in a single-vehicle car accident in Santa Clarita, California, while riding as a passenger in a car driven by his friend Roger Rodas, who also died in the crash. Walker had just attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide earlier that day. His death sent shockwaves through the film industry and among fans of the franchise he had helped build, and it left an enormous emotional void that the remaining cast and crew had to navigate as they completed the film he had been working on at the time of his passing. His character was given a poignant and respectful farewell in a later installment of the series, ensuring that his legacy within the franchise would be remembered with the dignity his contribution deserved. Playing Mia Toretto, Dom's sister and Brian's love interest, is Jordana Brewster, whose upbringing was remarkably international and multicultural even before her acting career began. Brewster was born on April 26, 1980, in Panama City, Panama, to a Brazilian mother who had once worked as a model and an American father who worked as an investment banker. Her family background carries an interesting historical distinction as well, since her paternal grandfather, Kingman Brewster, served as president of Yale University and later as the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom. Brewster's early life took her across multiple continents. She left Panama as an infant and spent her first 6 years in London before her family relocated to her mother's native Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where she lived for 4 more years and became fluent in Portuguese, a skill that would later prove personally meaningful given that Fast 5 itself is set in that very city. At the age of 10, her family moved once again, this time settling in Manhattan, New York, where Brewster would spend the next 15 years of her life. She attended the Convent of the Sacred Heart before transferring to the Professional Children's School to better accommodate her growing acting career, and she eventually enrolled at Yale University, following in the footsteps of her grandfather, graduating with a degree in English. Brewster began her acting career as a teenager, first appearing in a single episode of the soap opera All My Children before landing a recurring role on As the World Turns, where she played the character Nikki Munson for several years. Her first film role came in the 1998 horror film The Faculty, but it was her casting as Mia Toretto in The Fast and the Furious in 2001 that would define her career and connect her to a franchise she would remain part of for decades. Beyond the Fast and Furious series, Brewster has appeared in a range of other projects, including the horror film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, and television series such as the rebooted Dallas and Lethal Weapon, continuing to build a diverse body of work while remaining closely associated with the character that made her famous. No discussion of Fast 5 would be complete without a thorough look at Dwayne Johnson, who plays Luke Hobbs and whose introduction in this film marked one of the most consequential casting decisions in the franchise's history. Dwayne Douglas Johnson was born on May 2, 1972, in Hayward, California, to a father who was himself a professional wrestler performing under the name Rocky Johnson, and a mother of Samoan descent whose own father had been a prominent wrestling figure as well. Wrestling, in other words, was not simply a career path for Johnson but a deeply rooted family tradition spanning multiple generations. Because his father's career required constant travel between cities and even countries, Johnson experienced an unusually nomadic childhood, living in more than a dozen different states throughout his early years, as well as spending a portion of his youth in Auckland, New Zealand, where he attended primary school and developed an early love of rugby. This constant relocation made stability difficult and contributed to struggles in school, but it also exposed him to a remarkably wide range of cultures and experiences from a young age. As a teenager living in Miami, Johnson found his footing through American football, eventually earning a spot on the University of Miami's football team, where he played as a defensive lineman and was part of the school's national championship-winning team in 1991. He graduated from the University of Miami in 1995 with a degree in general studies, having originally pursued criminology, and attempted to build a professional football career afterward, briefly playing in the Canadian Football League. However, injuries cut that path short, redirecting him back toward the family business of professional wrestling. Johnson began wrestling professionally under the name Rocky Maivia, a tribute to both his father and his maternal grandfather, Peter Maivia, another legendary figure in the sport. He quickly rose through the ranks of the World Wrestling Federation, eventually adopting the persona of The Rock, a bold, endlessly charismatic character defined by sharp wit, larger-than-life confidence, and a flair for performance that made him one of the most popular and successful wrestlers of his era, engaging in legendary rivalries throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. His natural charisma translated smoothly to film, beginning with a supporting role in The Mummy Returns in 2001, which led directly to his first starring role in The Scorpion King the following year. By 2004, Johnson had made the decision to step away from full-time wrestling in order to focus on building his acting career, taking on a wide variety of roles that showcased both his physical presence and his surprising comedic range, including a turn playing a gay bodyguard in the comedy Be Cool, a choice he has spoken about as an important moment of trusting his own instincts despite pressure to avoid the part. When Johnson joined Fast Five as Luke Hobbs, he brought with him a level of star power and physical intensity that immediately elevated the franchise, and his chemistry with Vin Diesel on screen became one of the most celebrated dynamics in the series, eventually helping to expand the franchise's mythology for years afterward. Beyond his entertainment career, Johnson has built an extensive reputation for philanthropy, including founding a charitable foundation dedicated to helping terminally ill and at-risk children, and he has remained one of the most bankable and beloved figures in modern Hollywood. Tyrese Gibson, who plays Roman Pierce, brings his own remarkable rags to riches story to the Fast Five cast. Tyrese Darnell Gibson was born on December 30, 1978, and grew up in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, an area historically associated with significant economic hardship. He was the youngest of 4 children raised solely by his mother after his father left the family when Tyrese was still young. Despite these challenging circumstances, Gibson displayed an early talent for singing and performing, participating in local talent shows from around the age of 14. His life changed dramatically at 16 when he auditioned for and won a role in a 1994 Coca-Cola television commercial, singing the company's well-known jingle, an appearance that quickly opened doors within the entertainment industry. Shortly afterward, his striking appearance led to a modeling contract with Tommy Hilfiger, and he became a recognizable face in national advertising campaigns. Though modeling provided early opportunities, Gibson's true passion remained music, and in 1998 he signed with RCA Records, releasing his self-titled debut album, which achieved platinum sales and established him as a legitimate force in the R&B music scene, eventually earning him a Grammy nomination and an American Music Award for Favorite New Artist. Gibson continued releasing successful albums throughout the early 2000s while simultaneously building a film career, appearing in the acclaimed drama Baby Boy in 2001 before landing the role of Roman Pierce in Too Fast, Too Furious in 2003. A character defined by fearless bravado and comedic energy that would become a fan-favorite fixture of the franchise. Gibson's career expanded significantly with his casting in the blockbuster Transformers franchise beginning in 2007, further cementing his status as a major action star, before he returned to the Fast and Furious series for Fast Five, reuniting with the ensemble cast in a film that gave his character renewed prominence within the larger story. Beyond acting and music, Gibson has also found success as an author, publishing a New York Times best-selling book, and he has remained an active philanthropist, particularly through efforts supporting underprivileged children in communities similar to the one he grew up in. Alongside Tyrese, Chris "Ludacris" Bridges portrays Tej Parker, and his own path to Hollywood began not in acting but in the world of hip-hop music, where he became one of the most influential and commercially successful rappers of his generation. Christopher Brian Bridges was born on September 11, 1977, in Champaign, Illinois, though his family moved to the Chicago area when he was young before eventually relocating to Atlanta, Georgia, the city that would come to define much of his identity and creative development. Bridges began rapping at the remarkably young age of 9, performing for the first time at a family reunion, and by 12 he had joined an amateur rap group. After graduating from Banneker High School in Atlanta in 1995, he briefly attended Georgia State University to study music business, but his studies quickly took a back seat to opportunities within the local radio and music scene. He worked as an intern and later a disc jockey at an Atlanta hip-hop radio station under the on-air name Chris Lova Lova, a period during which he built connections that would prove valuable throughout his career, including an early collaboration with producer Timbaland that marked his recorded debut as a rapper. Bridges founded his own independent record label, Disturbing the Peace, releasing his debut album independently before it was picked up and re-released by Def Jam Recordings, becoming a major commercial success and establishing him as one of the leading figures of what became known as the Dirty South movement within hip-hop, known for exuberant, high-energy tracks filled with clever wordplay and larger-than-life charisma. Ludacris went on to release a string of multi-platinum albums throughout the early 2000s, eventually winning a Grammy Award for Best Rap Album, while simultaneously building a film career that included a role in The Wash in 2001 before joining the Fast and Furious franchise as Tej Parker, a technology-focused member of the crew whose expertise and comedic chemistry with Roman became a defining element of the ensemble, beginning with Fast Five's larger crew assembly. Beyond music and acting, Ludacris has built a wide-ranging business portfolio, including restaurants and consumer products, and he founded a charitable organization dedicated to supporting young people through creative arts education. Sung Kang, who portrays Han Lu, brings a quieter but equally compelling personal history to the ensemble. Sung Ho Kang was born on April 8, 1972, to South Korean immigrant parents, and he was raised in Gainesville, Georgia, by his Korean mother and African-American stepfather, an upbringing that exposed him early on to a blended cultural environment. During his teenage years, his family relocated to Barstow, California, and he later attended the University of California, Riverside, initially intending to pursue a career in law, a path that would have pleased his immigrant parents considerably more than the one he eventually chose. Despite their disappointment, Kang shifted his focus toward acting, beginning with small roles in television shows and films throughout the late 1990s, including brief appearances in projects like Martial Law and Pearl Harbor. His breakthrough came in 2002 with the acclaimed independent film Better Luck Tomorrow, in which he played the character Han Lu, a role that would eventually connect him directly to the Fast and Furious franchise when the character was reintroduced in The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift, with Kang reprising the role and gradually becoming one of the most beloved and enduring figures across multiple installments of the series, including his return in Fast 5 as part of the larger reunited crew. Kang has spoken candidly about entering the Tokyo Drift production with little prior knowledge of the real-world drifting subculture the film depicted, having done extensive research to prepare for the role. Beyond his acting career, Kang has remained an outspoken advocate against stereotypical portrayals of Asian American characters in Hollywood, and in more recent years he has expanded into directing and producing, including launching his own online series exploring his passion for automobiles. Gal Gadot, who plays Giselle Yasher, arrived in Hollywood through an especially distinctive path rooted in her upbringing in Israel. Gadot was born on April 30, 1985, in Petah Tikva, Israel, and grew up in the nearby town of Rosh Hashanah, the daughter of an engineer father and a teacher mother. As a child, she was highly athletic, studying dance and participating in multiple sports, and she has mentioned that one of her early ambitions was to become a professional choreographer rather than an actress. At 18, almost on a whim after her mother suggested she try, Gadot entered the Miss Israel beauty pageant and unexpectedly won the title in 2004, going on to represent her country at the Miss Universe pageant that same year. Following Israeli law requiring mandatory military service, Gadot then spent 2 years serving in the Israel Defense Forces, where her strong athletic background led to her being assigned as a combat fitness instructor, training soldiers in physical conditioning and combat readiness, an experience she has since described as instrumental in shaping her discipline and confidence. After completing her military service, Gadot began studying law and international relations at a college in Herzliya while continuing to build a modeling career that included international campaigns for major fashion and consumer brands. Her transition into acting came somewhat unexpectedly when a casting director who had seen her modeling portfolio invited her to audition for a role in a James Bond film. Although she did not land that particular part, the audition process sparked a genuine interest in pursuing acting more seriously. And the same casting director later recommended her for a role in the 4th installment of the Fast and Furious franchise. Gadot has noted that her military background specifically appealed to director Justin Lin, who wanted an actress with genuine familiarity around weapons and tactical movement for the role of Giselle, a former operative with a background in espionage and combat. She made her acting debut in the Israeli television series Bubit before joining the Fast and Furious franchise, beginning with the film simply titled Fast and Furious in 2009, reprising the role of Giselle in Fast 5 and subsequent sequels, often performing much of her own stunt work throughout the physically demanding action sequences. Gadot's career would later expand dramatically beyond the franchise when she was cast as Wonder Woman within the DC Extended Universe, a role that transformed her into one of the most recognizable actresses in the world and made her a particularly significant cultural figure both in Hollywood and in her home country of Israel. Joaquim de Almeida, who portrays the film's central antagonist Hernan Reyes, brought decades of international acting experience to the production, having built a substantial career across both Portuguese and American cinema long before joining the Fast and Furious franchise. Born in Lisbon, Portugal, Almeida trained extensively in theater before transitioning into film and television work across Europe, eventually building a reputation in the United States for portraying complex, often morally ambiguous characters in major studio productions. His extensive body of work prior to Fast 5 included prominent roles in films exploring themes of crime, corruption, and political intrigue, experience that made him a natural fit for the role of a ruthless and calculating businessman whose criminal empire is built on corruption and fear. His performance as Reyes in Fast 5, portraying a man whose polished exterior conceals a violent and manipulative core, became one of the more memorable antagonist performances within the franchise, grounding the film's larger-than-life action within a believable and unsettling portrait of institutional corruption. Matt Schulze, who plays Vince, has a career closely tied to the earliest roots of the Fast and Furious franchise itself, having originated the character in the very first film released in 2001. Schulze built his career through a combination of stunt work and acting, a background that gave him a genuine physical authenticity in action-heavy roles. His return to the franchise in Fast 5 as Vince, a character whose reckless decisions early in the film set much of the plot's central conflict into motion, connected the newer, larger-scale direction of the series back to its original street racing roots, providing a thread of continuity for longtime fans who had followed the character since the franchise's earliest days. Elsa Pataky, who plays Helena Neves, the Brazilian police detective who becomes an unlikely ally to Dom's crew, brought her own well-established career in Spanish and Latin American cinema and television to the production. Pataky had already built a substantial following in Spain before expanding into international film work, and her casting as Elena added an important layer of moral complexity to the story, representing a character caught between her official duties as a law enforcement officer and her personal desire to see justice served against the corrupt system that had failed her. Her performance helped ground the film's larger heist narrative with genuine emotional stakes tied to loss and a search for accountability. Rounding out the film's central Brazilian setting are Tego Calderon and Don Omar, who portray Leo and Santos, two brothers with a background in demolitions who join Dom's crew for the climactic heist. Both performers built their initial fame not in film but in reggaeton music, becoming two of the genre's most influential and commercially successful artists throughout Latin America and beyond before crossing over into film roles within the Fast and Furious franchise. Their musical careers helped introduce reggaeton to global audiences during the genre's rise in popularity throughout the 2000s, and their casting in the franchise reflected the series' broader effort to authentically represent the diverse cultures and communities featured throughout its increasingly international storylines. Particularly fitting given Fast Five's setting in Rio de Janeiro, and its themes of found family drawn from many different backgrounds coming together for a common cause. Diesel's rise from a struggling young performer with no formal industry connections into one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood history is often cited as one of the more unlikely success stories of his generation, precisely because so much of it was built through sheer persistence and self-reliance rather than early industry backing. He wrote, financed, directed, and starred in his own work when no one else was willing to give him a chance, and that same stubborn determination has remained a defining trait throughout his decades-long career, including his continued involvement as a producer on the Fast and Furious franchise, where he has taken an active hand in shaping the direction of the series well beyond simply acting in it. His willingness to bet on himself during those difficult early years in New York, funding his ambitions through unglamorous work while continuing to write and perform, laid the foundation for a career that would eventually make him one of the most recognizable faces in global cinema, and that same spirit of resilience is often reflected in the character of Dominic Toretto himself. A man who similarly refuses to give up on the people and the life he has built despite every obstacle placed in his path. Paul Walker's love of the ocean, meanwhile, was never simply a passing interest but something that shaped major decisions throughout his life, including his approach to charitable work and his personal time away from film sets. He was known among friends and colleagues for organizing diving trips and participating in marine research expeditions whenever his filming schedule allowed, including joining scientists on shark tagging expeditions off the coast of Mexico as part of ongoing conservation research. This genuine passion for the natural world gave Walker a public image that extended well beyond his on-screen persona as a fast-driving action star, and many who worked with him throughout the Fast and Furious franchise have spoken about how that same easygoing, adventurous spirit carried over into his approach to acting and to his relationships with castmates. His bond with Vin Diesel in particular became one of the most talked about friendships in Hollywood, with both actors frequently describing their connection in terms of genuine brotherhood rather than simply professional collaboration, a dynamic that translated directly onto the screen and became part of why audiences connected so strongly with the found family themes running through every film in the series, including Fast Five. Jordana Brewster's multicultural upbringing across Panama, London, Rio de Janeiro, and New York gave her a genuinely international perspective that set her apart from many of her Hollywood contemporaries, and her fluency in Portuguese, developed during her childhood years in Brazil, added a layer of personal authenticity to her involvement in Fast Five specifically. Given the film's setting in Rio de Janeiro, Brewster has spoken in interviews about how meaningful it felt to return, even fictionally, to a city and culture that had shaped a formative part of her own childhood. Her academic achievements at Yale also set her apart within an industry where formal higher education is not always a defining feature of a young actor's resume, and she has continued to balance her acting career with advocacy work, including efforts focused on expanding opportunities for women both in front of and behind the camera throughout the television and film industries. Dwayne Johnson's transformation from a struggling, often overlooked football player facing the end of his athletic dreams into one of the most dominant forces in both professional wrestling and Hollywood filmmaking remains one of the most widely told comeback stories in modern entertainment. After his football career ended prematurely and painfully, Johnson has described a period of financial hardship and uncertainty during which he had very little money and even less clarity about what direction his life would take next. Turning to wrestling, a field where his family had deep roots but where he had to prove himself entirely on his own merit rather than relying on his father's or grandfather's reputation. Johnson built his early wrestling persona from the ground up, facing initial resistance from fans before eventually developing the confident, charismatic character that would make him a global icon. That same work ethic and determination to reinvent himself carried directly into his film career, where he transitioned from wrestling into acting at a moment when very few professional wrestlers had successfully made that leap, and he has often credited his willingness to take creative risks, including his early choice to play against type in comedic roles, as central to the sustained success he has enjoyed for decades. His arrival in Fast 5 as Luke Hobbs came at a pivotal moment in his career, helping to establish him even further as one of the defining action stars of his generation, while simultaneously giving the franchise a fresh jolt of energy that helped propel it to a new level of global popularity. Tyrese Gibson has often spoken publicly about how his childhood and what's shaped his worldview and his determination to build a better life not only for himself but for the community he came from, and his continued philanthropic work reflects that deeply personal connection to the challenges many young people face growing up in similar circumstances. His decision to found an organization aimed at supporting underprivileged children reflects a desire to give back directly to communities like the one that raised him, and he has frequently credited the mentors and opportunities that appeared unexpectedly in his own life, such as the high school teacher who encouraged him to audition for his breakthrough commercial, as the reason he remains so committed to creating similar opportunities for others. His transition from music into acting, and his ability to sustain success across both industries simultaneously for many years, reflects a versatility that has helped him remain relevant across multiple entertainment mediums throughout a career spanning several decades. Ludacris built much of his early identity through Atlanta's vibrant hip-hop scene, a community he has described as fundamental to his development both as an artist and as a person, even though he was not originally born in the city. His transition from local radio personality to internationally recognized recording artist happened remarkably quickly once his music began reaching wider audiences, and his continued success as an actor within the Fast and Furious franchise represents just one part of an extensive and varied career that spans music, film, business ventures, and philanthropy. His approach to Tej Parker, a character defined by technical brilliance layered with comedic charm, drew naturally from Ludacris's own well-established public persona, blending intelligence and humor in a way that felt authentic to audiences already familiar with his work as a recording artist. Some King's journey reflects a broader and important conversation within Hollywood about representation, particularly regarding Asian American actors navigating an industry that has historically offered limited and often stereotypical roles for performers of Asian descent. Khan has been notably vocal about the importance of Han Lu as a character specifically because the role avoided many of the reductive stereotypes commonly assigned to Asian characters in American action films, instead presenting a character defined by quiet confidence, loyalty, and genuine emotional depth. His continued involvement in the franchise across multiple films, including his significant presence in Fast 5 as part of the newly assembled international crew, has made him one of the most consistently beloved figures within the series, and his more recent ventures into directing and producing reflect a broader ambition to create further opportunities for underrepresented voices within the industry. Gal Gadot's path from a small town in Israel to global stardom carries a distinctly unusual trajectory compared to many of her Hollywood peers, given that acting was never her original career ambition and that her early adult years were shaped far more by mandatory military service than by any formal theatrical training. She has spoken candidly about how her time in the Israel Defense Forces taught her discipline, physical confidence, and a grounded sense of self that she carried directly into her approach to acting, particularly in physically demanding roles requiring combat choreography and stunt work. Her casting in the Fast and Furious franchise as Giselle, a character whose backstory involves work as a highly trained operative, allowed her real-world experience to inform her performance in a way that felt distinctly authentic, and that authenticity would go on to serve her tremendously when she was later cast as Wonder Woman, a role that similarly demanded both physical capability and genuine screen presence. Her journey from Miss Israel to one of the highest-paid actresses in the world stands as one of the more unique career arcs among her Fast Five castmates. Taken together, the life stories of the Fast Five cast reveal just how varied and unpredictable the paths to Hollywood success can truly be. Some, like Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, endured years of financial hardship and repeated rejection before finding their footing. Others, like Gal Gadot and Jordana Brewster, arrived through entirely different worlds, whether military service and beauty pageants or elite academic institutions and international upbringing. Some, like Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris, built their fame first in the music industry before crossing over into film, while others, like Sung Kang and Matt Schulze, developed their careers steadily through independent film and stunt work long before achieving mainstream recognition. What unites them all is a shared commitment to their craft and a willingness to take risks at pivotal moments in their careers, qualities that ultimately brought them together on the set of a film that would go on to redefine an entire franchise and cement their places as beloved figures within one of the most successful action series in cinema history. From professional wrestling and competitive beauty pageants to reggaeton music and Ivy League universities, from child modeling and nightclub bouncing to Israeli military service and European theater training, each performer arrived at this film through a completely different path, shaped by different struggles, different ambitions, and different definitions of success, yet all of them came together to create one of the most beloved ensembles in modern action cinema. Their combined chemistry, built from genuinely varied life experiences, is a significant part of why Fast Five resonates so deeply with audiences even years after its release, since the found family theme at the heart of the film reflects something authentic about the diverse group of performers who brought that story to life. Every great action film hides an equally fascinating story behind the camera, and Fast Five is no exception, since the making of this movie involved an enormous budget, a genuinely difficult international production, and a set full of larger-than-life personalities whose off-screen chemistry produced some of the most entertaining and often hilarious moments in the franchise's history. Fast Five was produced on a reported budget of approximately $125 million, a substantial figure for its time that reflected the ambition the studio and filmmakers had for reinventing the franchise. This budget represented a significant jump compared to earlier entries in the series, and it needed to be, given the sheer scale of what director Justin Lin and his team were attempting to accomplish. Rather than simply delivering another film centered on illegal street racing, the production was tasked with building an elaborate heist thriller featuring a much larger ensemble cast, extensive international location shooting. The making of Fast Five began in earnest once Justin Lin, Vin Diesel, and Paul Walker's returns to the franchise were finalized in February of 2010, setting the wheels in motion for what would become one of the most logistically complicated productions the series had attempted up to that point. Principal photography began in the summer of that year, in late June, and was originally expected to wrap within a few months. But the sheer scale and complexity of the film's action sequences meant that filming ultimately stretched on considerably longer than planned, continuing well into October before the production could finally be considered complete. This extended shooting schedule reflected just how much practical, hands-on work went into constructing the film's action sequences, since the filmmakers made a deliberate decision to rely heavily on real stunt work and practical effects rather than leaning on computer-generated imagery, a choice that added significant time, cost, and physical risk to the production, but one that paid off enormously in how visceral and grounded the final action sequences felt on screen. One of the most fascinating aspects of the production involved exactly where the film was actually shot, since the story is set almost entirely in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, yet a great deal of what audiences see on screen was not filmed there at all. The production did send a dedicated film unit to Rio itself to capture authentic aerial shots and establishing footage of the city's most iconic landmarks, including Sugarloaf Mountain, the Christ the Redeemer statue, Ipanema Beach, and the historic Fort Copacabana, giving the film a genuine sense of place whenever these locations appear on screen. Several key character introduction scenes were also filmed on location in Rio, including a sequence where one of the crew members is shown arriving at the city's international airport in character. However, once word got out among the local public that filming was taking place at the airport, the cast and crew found themselves suddenly mobbed by enthusiastic fans and onlookers, turning what was supposed to be a controlled, professional shoot into a chaotic scramble to complete the scene amid the excitement of a spontaneous crowd. A similar situation occurred during a separate sequence filmed elsewhere in the city, where a cast member's public appearance while filming a scene involving purchasing a car quickly drew a large and enthusiastic crowd of local fans eager to catch a glimpse of the production. A beach sequence showing the newly assembled heist crew walking together was filmed on the famous sands of Copacabana Beach, giving that particular moment in the film an unmistakably authentic Rio atmosphere. Despite these efforts to capture Rio locations, the production ultimately determined that the city was not practical for filming many of the film's larger and more complex action sequences, largely due to logistical challenges involved in controlling such a massive, densely populated urban environment for extended stunt work. As a result, the decision was made to relocate the bulk of principal photography to Puerto Rico, a choice influenced in part by tax incentives offered by the Puerto Rican government at the time, which made shooting there considerably more cost-effective for the production. Puerto Rico's capital city of San Juan became the primary base for filming, and the island's combination of lush tropical greenery and wide, flexible city streets gave the production designers exactly the kind of raw material they needed to recreate the visual feel of Rio's densely packed favela neighborhoods, all while operating in an environment where the production could exercise far greater control over crowds, traffic, and safety during the film's most dangerous stunt sequences. The extensive rooftop chase sequence that takes place across the tightly packed rooftops of Rio's hillside favelas was actually filmed entirely in Puerto Rico for exactly this reason, since the production needed complete control over the physical environment in order to safely stage such an elaborate and hazardous action sequence. Transforming Puerto Rico into a believable stand-in for Rio de Janeiro was no small task, and much of that responsibility fell to production designer Peter Wenham, who was given roughly 4 weeks to convert previously scouted Puerto Rican locations into convincing replicas of the specific Rio neighborhoods the filmmakers had originally scouted before the decision was made to relocate. This was an enormously demanding assignment that required Wenham's team to physically alter more than 30 separate buildings throughout the filming locations, repainting facades, adjusting architectural details, and distressing structures with debris and aging effects to match the specific visual character of the Rio favelas depicted in the story. Because certain sequences required heavy camera equipment and rigging to be mounted directly onto building structures, Wenham's team also had to go through the labor-intensive process of structurally reinforcing numerous buildings throughout the production to ensure they could safely support the weight and stress of professional film equipment during extended shooting days. Beyond Puerto Rico and Rio itself, portions of the film were also shot in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as in Arizona and California, including a memorable stretch of desert terrain used for staging the film's dramatic opening train heist sequence, which was filmed along Rio railway lines in California rather than being constructed as an artificial set. Speaking of the train heist, one of the most remarkable facts about that sequence is just how much of it was accomplished through genuine, practical stunt work rather than digital effects. The dramatic moment in which a flatbed truck slams directly into the moving train was filmed for real, without the use of miniature models or computer-generated trickery, and the impact was significant enough that it very nearly derailed the actual train being used for the shoot, a detail that becomes visible if you watch the sequence closely. Since the resulting jolt from the real-world collision is considerably more violent and unpredictable looking than a digitally rendered version would typically appear. This commitment to grounded, practical stunt work was echoed throughout the entire production and became something of a point of pride for the filmmaking team, who wanted Fast 5 to feel more physically real and tangible than some of the increasingly digital heavy action films being released around the same period. Another wonderful piece of on-set trivia involves the vehicles used during the sequence in which the crew steals a group of Dodge Charger police cars in order to stage an impromptu drag race through the streets. At one point during that sequence, the police lights on one of the Chargers unexpectedly activate on their own, seemingly as part of the scene. In reality, this was never scripted at all. According to the film's car coordinator, Dodge had only just released that particular generation of the Charger at the time of filming, meaning several of the vehicles used in production were still essentially unfinished prototype models. The lights activating on their own turned out to be a simple electrical malfunction with that specific vehicle, completely unplanned and unintentional. However, once the filmmakers reviewed the footage, they found the unexpected moment so fitting and so in keeping with the reckless, showboating personality of Tyrese Gibson's character Roman that they made the deliberate decision to keep the mistake in the final cut of the film, reasoning that it was exactly the kind of impulsive, attention-grabbing thing Roman would have done on purpose anyway, even if the actual cause was nothing more than a wiring glitch in a brand-new prototype car. The massive bank vault that becomes the centerpiece of the film's climactic chase sequence also carries an interesting piece of behind-the-scenes trivia related to realism and practicality. In the story, the vault is depicted as an enormously heavy, virtually indestructible steel safe reinforced with thick plating, the kind of object that in real life would weigh well over 10 tons given its described construction. Dragging an object of that true weight through city streets using nothing more than two mid-sized muscle cars would be physically impossible, no matter how heavily modified those vehicles might be. For the actual filming, the production used a specially built prop vault that weighed considerably less than a single ton, a necessary compromise that allowed the stunt teams to safely and convincingly stage the vault's dramatic swinging, crashing, and destructive rampage through the streets without placing an impossible strain on the vehicles or the stunt drivers involved in the sequence. Perhaps the most talked about piece of behind-the-scenes history from Fast 5 involves the dynamic between Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, whose characters share one of the film's most memorable and physically demanding confrontations, an extended hand-to-hand brawl staged within the tight, chaotic confines of a Rio favela. This single fight sequence was so elaborate, and so physically punishing to choreograph and execute safely that it reportedly took over a week of dedicated filming to complete in full, with both actors and their stunt teams working through numerous takes, camera setups, and safety considerations to capture every blow, throw, and impact in a way that felt both believable and suitably explosive on screen. Dwayne Johnson has spoken about the physical demands of that sequence in interviews, joking that while the choreography called for his character to throw Dom through a wall using a wrestling-style suplex, the studio understandably would not allow Diesel himself to actually go through the wall during filming, meaning that portion of the stunt had to be handled by a trained stunt double taking the brunt of the impact instead, while Diesel and Johnson themselves handled as much of the surrounding physical performance as safely possible. That fight sequence also became the origin point of one of the most widely discussed pieces of behind-the-scenes lore connected to the entire franchise, involving the working relationship between Diesel and Johnson during the making of Fast 5. Years later, Diesel would describe his approach to directing Johnson's performance during this period as a kind of tough love, explaining that as a producer on the film he felt it was his responsibility to push Johnson, who was still relatively new to dramatic film acting after his extensive background in professional wrestling, toward the specific tone and intensity he wanted the character of Hobbs to carry on screen. According to Diesel, achieving that particular quality in Johnson's performance, the sense that Hobbs hits the audience like an unstoppable force the moment he appears, required a great deal of hands-on creative pushing during the production. Johnson, for his part, has responded to these comments over the years with good humor, noting that he found the framing of events amusing when he eventually heard about it, and the two men's professional relationship, whatever tensions may have existed during the demanding shoot, evolved considerably over the years that followed. eventually reaching a point of public reconciliation many years after Fast 5 was completed. What is often lost in the retelling of this story is that whatever friction existed behind the scenes clearly did not hurt the final product, since the on-screen chemistry between Dom and Hobbs, forged through that grueling week of fight choreography, became one of the most celebrated and enduring elements of the entire franchise. Another delightful piece of trivia involves exactly how Dwayne Johnson came to be cast in Fast 5 in the first place, since the role of Luke Hobbs was not originally written with him in mind at all. According to those involved in the film's development, the character had initially been envisioned for a different, considerably older type of actor, with the veteran performer Tommy Lee Jones reportedly having been considered for the part during the earliest stages of development. Vin Diesel himself has told a rather charming story about how Johnson ultimately ended up in the role instead, crediting a fan named Jan Kelly, who had expressed to Diesel directly how much she would love to see him and Johnson share the screen together in a film. That fan suggestion apparently stuck with Diesel, and the idea eventually evolved into the casting decision that brought Johnson into the franchise as Hobbs, a choice that would go on to fundamentally reshape the direction and scale of the entire series for years to come, all traced back to one enthusiastic fan's simple wish to see two of the era's biggest action stars sharing scenes together. The production also produced a number of genuinely funny continuity slip-ups that fans have delighted in pointing out over the years, many of which reveal just how chaotic and fast-paced the shooting of such a massive, stunt-heavy production can actually be behind the scenes. During the extended vault chase sequence, for example, observant fans have noted that the chains connecting the vault to the two pursuing chargers become visibly tangled after the vault rolls over during an early turn. Yet in the very next shot, those same chains appear perfectly straight and untangled again, a minor but amusing reminder of just how many separate takes, camera angles, and filming days were stitched together to create the illusion of one continuous, unbroken chase across the city. Similarly, during the confrontation on a bridge involving Hobbs and Elena, both characters are shown slamming their car doors shut as they exit their vehicle, only for one of those same doors to mysteriously be shown standing open again in the very next cut, a small but charming glimpse into the kind of minor continuity juggling that inevitably occurs on a production this large and complicated. Fans have also pointed out a small logo that appears on Dwayne Johnson's shirt only after his big fight with Diesel concludes, having been notably absent throughout the fight itself, a detail that likely reflects wardrobe changes made between different filming days for what was, as previously mentioned, an unusually long and drawn-out sequence to shoot in full. Beyond the physical stunt work and technical trivia, the film's ensemble cast brought an enormous amount of natural humor and camaraderie to the set, much of which has been documented through official behind-the-scenes featurettes, gag reels, and interviews conducted throughout the production. The dynamic between Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris in particular became one of the most beloved comedic elements both on screen and off, with the two actors' natural rapport and quick-witted banter translating directly into the playful rivalry their characters, Roman and Tej, share throughout the film. Cast members and crew have described the atmosphere on set during scenes involving these two actors as consistently loose and full of laughter, with numerous